Welcome to another Power Pack session of the Amplify Your Business Growth series. I'm your host, Lance Johnson, and I'm thrilled to introduce today's expert, Bruce Baker. Bruce is a seasoned business builder and profit coach with workplaces, and he brings a wealth of hard earned wisdom to the table. Unlike many consultants, Bruce and his team are experienced business owners themselves. They've navigated the challenges of growth, setbacks, and everything else in between. Today, Bruce is going to help us tackle a core issue that plagues many entrepreneurs, and that's getting unstuck. We'll be diving deep into his 4E method for results, a powerful framework designed to help you move from vision to execution with clarity and resilience. Expect actionable insights on setting realistic expectations, energizing yourself for the long haul, and making grounded financial and operational decisions. Bruce will also share real world case studies and practical strategies to implement these principles in your own business. Plus, we'll be discussing his upcoming ebook, a valuable resource to help you further apply these concepts. So get ready to take notes and leave with a roadmap for sustainable business growth. Welcome, Bruce. I really appreciate you coming in and joining us today. And let me just bring you in here so everybody can see you.
There you
There
go.
he
Thanks,
is.
Lance.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thanks a lot
having me.
for,
And
yeah.
yeah, no, thanks for having me. And good to have everybody on listening as well.
Yeah. And so for those of you who are tuning in today, this is definitely an interactive webinar. So if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat interface and we will definitely be asking those on your behalf. So let's get going right off the hop here, Bruce. You've worked with
Yeah.
so many different businesses. Um, and I'd imagine you bump into a lot of different reasons why businesses or entrepreneurs themselves get stuck
Yeah.
in the growth of their business and their growth journey. Can you share with us some of those reasons, that just kind of come to mind?
Well, it's interesting you use the word stuck. And, stuck is because I can't get to something, I can't do something. And in business, what it's all about is a result. And in order to get a result, what do we need to do? We need to execute. And I find that, over and over again, business owners that either want to grow their business, maybe even start up a business, or in some cases, fix up the business. In other words, they're in trouble. They need to get out of trouble. They struggle primarily and they get stuck. Why? Because they're not executing. And there's a very key reason why people don't execute. And if people don't execute, well, as I said, they don't see the results. That vicious cycle tends to put us back and keep us there.
Yeah, and I know as a business owner myself, as an entrepreneur, I can't tell you how many times I have bumped into that, right? Where
Mm.
I feel like I'm making some progress and I get to a certain plateau and then I have a hard time like breaking through that. I kind of fall into a rut and that is so frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the rut. Some people say I'm spinning my wheels, or
Yeah.
someone says I move a step forward and I move two steps back.
Yep.
There's a reason for that, and we are not aware of those reasons. So what we're not aware of, we can't take control over. And if we can't take control, it's the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, you can't fix anything if you don't know it's happening, right? And so if you don't
100%.
have that awareness, that understanding, and this is the reality is that most entrepreneurs didn't go to entrepreneur school. I mean, some yeah
Right.
maybe went to business school. I myself did, but they didn't teach me how to start a business, to grow a business from that I owned. I mean, they were talking about more corporate kind of topics and so
Yeah.
on. And so we don't innately come with those skill sets, really.
Yeah, no, and I've always said business, and this is by no means scientific when I say this, but it seems to be that way. Business is 99% emotional and 1% intellectual. So you can go to school, you can read a book, you can, hire a coach, a consultant, etc. At the end of the day, none of that matters unless you are primed to execute.
Mm.
And no one can force you to execute. You are the one, you're the author of your ability to execute and get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, and that execution is so critically important. And I know myself, I'm a bit of an ideas guy, right? Like I like
Right.
that bigger picture. I like dreaming up all these different concepts and how to grow a business. I don't have a shortage of ideas,
Yeah.
but what I do struggle with from time to time is definitely the execution part of it. And I know I'm not alone in that. Like I talk to a lot of my peers who are entrepreneurs, and that's what they'll say too, is that I'm really good at getting like 90% of the way there. And in that last 10%, I'm just not good at getting it over the finish line for some reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's and I mean this with great, care and attention, is that and I'm one of those as well, we're all people, we tend to fall in love with the idea of success. So when
Yeah.
we want to start a business or we want to take our business to the next level and we're in trouble and I can see a way out, I just have to get there, I need to know how to do it, etc., etc. We fall in love with that. And then what happens is we tend to, there's no other way to put it, we tend to fall out of love with the actual actions and what we need to do in order to actually make that a reality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a big problem.
Yeah, totally. And that's like for me, it's so important for me to have a team around me that are really good implementers who can
Hmm.
really execute on the things because I know that's a shortcoming in myself. And so that's how I kind of solve for it. Uh,
Yeah.
but but even with that support, and if there's still enough things that I still have to execute on in order for the business to grow. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's my role as the CEO of the company is to ensure that we are finding those growth opportunities, executing on them, and achieving it. And if we fail to execute, it doesn't matter how
Yeah.
good the plan is, right?
Well, you mentioned something that is quite important because it is certainly up to the owner or the leader of the business to ensure that execution takes place. But when we talk about that reality side and we talk about being able to drive forward, it impacts a team as well. And a lot of the work that's been put into this model talks about how you energize your team, because your team, guess what? They're people with the same psyche behind it all, and they're being influenced in certain ways as well. So being able to get your team to execute is also a huge deal, and this methodology actually impacts that significantly as well.
Which is so important. Okay, so
Yeah,
we had a chance to chat before last week, I think it was, where we were
yeah,
just you're giving me a little bit more of an overview as to okay, so the 4E method, what is it, and so on. And you told me at the time that the 4Es are emotional investment, expectation setting, energizing yourself, and then execution, which we've talked real briefly on here so far. So um, if we were to dig in a little bit deeper, why don't we start with probably emotional investment then?
mm,
So can you give us really what we need to know and understand as entrepreneurs as we're really trying to achieve that long-term success? Where does emotional investment come into play?
absolutely. But before I talk about emotional investment, I'd like to all the listeners to imagine a pyramid in your mind, right?
Okay.
The pyramid, at the end of the day, has its final point not because it exists in isolation, but because of a foundation, the very first layer, if you will, of the pyramid. So the 4 E's, consider those the layers of the pyramid, and everything that occurs has to start with the basic, the most important foundation. And as you said, Lance, emotional investment. So what is emotional investment?
Yep.
It's what do I care about deeply enough to push through? Again, I'm going to say that again.
Okay.
What do I care enough deeply, right? Deep, that's going to allow me to give me that thrust when I need it, that energy when I need to push through. And whenever we're wanting to execute or achieve something, yes, it's about the excitement, it's about the initial move and passion to do it. But do I have enough inside me, energy and passion, in order to push through? So that's what I want to emphasize. It's
'Cause,
not about it. Go ahead.
yeah, I just wanted to sort of interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure that I understand that. So I'm going to use myself as an example. Are you saying like my passion for the reason why I started Ample Media is to help businesses with their growth through great marketing, right? To try to help them address customer acquisition, lead generation, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Really great content that's going to drive that forward for them. So that's my passion, is to help other businesses. Is that what you're talking about? Like if I didn't have the passion or couldn't identify what my passion was, then that's going to be problematic because when it gets tough, I'm not going to be able to keep pushing forward.
It's a part of it, but not
Okay.
entirely. So the passion is certainly something you need to do anything. Your mission, your focus on what you want to do, and this is not a mission, vision, value discussion. This is more about, I have a passion to want to serve X and deliver Y.
Okay.
But what this is about is all about emotional buy-in, because passion or believing something is one thing, being able to buy into something that I'm prepared to take the good, the bad, and the ugly in order to make this a reality. If you don't care enough about that, or if that a buy-in and what it really means is too much, or something that you're not prepared to buy into, it feels like a grind.
Mm,
And I don't know about you, and I'm sure listeners on the call would say the same thing. When something starts to feel like a grind, and that's not to essentially say that there isn't some level of grind in anything you do in building or growing a business or getting out of trouble.
yep.
But if that becomes a continuous, never-ending grind, right, that's where the problem starts, and that's where we start to pull back by truly buying in emotionally.
Mm,
And what's critical at this point is the word clarity, gaining clarity about what this actually means that I'm quote unquote buying into and that I want to achieve.
okay. Can you give us an example then, whether it's a business that you've worked with or that you've observed in terms of that clarity piece? Like, how do you get your clients to really buy in and really develop that clarity around that
Mm.
emotional investment they have to make?
Yeah, absolutely. So immediately, I had a client. She was this was about probably about a year and a half ago now. She was preparing to launch a new product line, and she'd done launches before, but always felt scattered and burned out by the end. Right,
Okay.
so it didn't really gain a lot of traction. Um, I introduced her to the 4E method, and specifically looking at the first layer of that pyramid, um, she reconnected with why she was doing this in the first place,
Ah,
right? And
Simon
in this,
Sinek's Why. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So there was emotional investment, but the interesting part about her was, it's called her Sally for short, but um, it was, she had been down this path before, and what she was experiencing, which the next layer we'll talk more about when we look at it, or the next E, was, it was, I feel burnt out. I feel like, I've got to do this again. I'm excited. I know this is my purpose and where I want to go, but I don't know if I want to do this again, right?
Mm,
And that setting that clarity, especially when it comes to me asking, one of the questions I asked her was, what do you want to do differently this time? So if you were to go back to Sally in the past and meet up with yourself, what advice would you give her? What guidance would you give her? That's what we're talking about at that level. Again, she had it a little differently because she had been through this already and wanted to redo this again, but just couldn't find that need to move forward.
interesting. Any advice that you would give to entrepreneurs who are really struggling to find that again, right? Like, because we do when we hit some of those roadblocks,
Mm.
whether it's something that you know is out of our control. So a downturn in the economy which just makes things more difficult, or potentially it's just some mistakes that you made as an entrepreneur as you were growing your business, and so now there's a setback, and you
Right.
kind of have to reset, restart, and keep going. That's tough for anybody to handle. So knowing that I want to continue to do it, how do I really tap into and really develop a stronger
Mm.
emotional investment into it then?
It's a great question. And that, maybe not go to the next level yet, but I think that's where the next level,
Okay.
the next E is probably an essential part. And like you said earlier on, it's the expectation setting. So if we think about someone that is just embarking on this for the first time, they've spoken about, they're sort of thinking about their idea, they're buying into it emotionally, and they just push foot, they just hit the gas, right? And as they get to that point where they have to start doing things, taking specific actions, looking for specific, um, you know, uh, points in their journey where they actually have to see results and they don't see those results, or they're just not able to execute and see those results, primarily because they didn't necessarily understand what they were expecting to see. And what I mean by this is, and you'd expect more of a motivational response from a guy like me, but when people start off at the emotional investment level and they just don't have the drive to want to push through, they just don't have that emotional buy-in, I'm the first person to say abandon it,
Okay.
right? Don't move forward if you don't have the buy-in. And again, the reason why people don't have the buy-in in the first place is because they didn't clearly set the expectations, which is the second E in the second level in the pyramid, and what that is what will this really take? So whether it's scaling or recovering your business, whatever, it's the demands realism. What's the cost in terms of time, energy, cash flow? What are the trade-offs, right? If you skip this level, if you skip this E, the burnout or the blind spots, specifically the blind spots, are going to catch up with you. They always do. And what happens is that creates burnout. And the reason it creates burnout is because, oh, you know what, I didn't expect this. Yet another thing that knocks me on the side that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
What happens? And it's exactly like we spoke about the client that you know earlier on, where Sally hit that point, burnt out, saying, okay, let me give this another try. And to your example early on, where businesses or business owners try to give this another try and they just don't have that buy-in anymore. We're trying to avoid that. This is what the primary purpose of this model is. What we're trying to do is avoid or protecting the business owner from having to start from step one again, or the first E again,
Yeah.
and not get into that situation.
So the term that comes to my mind then is like rose-colored glasses, right? At this
Right.
second stage, really setting clear expectations and reasonable expectations, not going into things with rose-colored glasses.
Totally.
That's got to be the secret to this step.
Yeah, yeah, and it's you know, I get quite passionate about you know, when people attend a seminar or attend, you know, an event where it's about business results and about focus and about discipline and, you know, about the technical know-how on how to do this. And people leave these sessions, it doesn't even have to be a session, it could be a book, it could be anything that you listen to or that you engage yourself in. And not even within about 24 to 48 hours, the emotional focus or the emotional investment starts to wane. And they leave the event, go back to normal everyday life. And there is some attempt to put this in place and get going, but they haven't done the reality check. They've still got, as you say, those glasses on, rose-colored glasses, and reality hits. And when reality hits, it hits like a sledgehammer. So
Yeah.
I would rather advise people to be prepared, understand the blueprint, understand what you're going to have to put in place to make this a reality.
So I'm curious then, like what kind of key elements, I suppose, um, are part of setting those realistic expectations, right? Because it's one
Yeah.
thing to say, yeah, you got to be realistic. Come on, like make sure you do the proper research and everything else. But there's got to be some steps there that you see that really help people do that, and whether
Mm.
that's internally themselves are doing it or they're getting outside resources. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, how do we actually become realistic? Because sometimes, again,
Yeah.
we don't know what we don't know, right? So it seems good, it sounds good. You know, you do a little bit of maybe testing of your idea out there, asking people for advice, or and so on, test the marketplace, and it's just like, yeah, this sounds good, okay. And I don't know anything about maybe growing a business yet,
Mm.
and so I don't know what those pitfalls might be. So how do I even become realistic?
Yeah. Yeah. You remind me about a client I worked with a couple of months ago that asked me to do up a business plan for him.
Okay.
And did it up. Everything was good. Great blueprint, because a business plan is not just for a bank or for an insurance company. It's there. A business plan is your blueprint. It's your guide on execution. And I remember, we had our session, sat down, and we started working through the business plan. And once he was done, he said, "Oh, this is an amazing plan. It set out everything that I need to do, et cetera, et cetera." And I said, "Okay, time to burst the bubble."
Hmm.
And bursting the bubble is not something in a negative way, but bursting the bubble means you haven't done this before. These these points, this information, this blueprint seems to be well thought of, thought out, designed, whatever the case may be. But the actual practical implementation, the practical steps that it takes, doesn't just come with, rewards. And it does. There's tons of reward in it. But it also comes with some curveballs.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy part is that, and this is based on tons of research as well, not just my opinion, every single business, no matter what industry, no matter whether it's for profit or not for profit, goes through the exact same challenges as you grow. And with that comes very unique circumstances where the action plans for one business owner are going to mean, or that business owner is going to experience something quite different than the
Yep.
other business owner is going to experience.
Yeah.
So the expectation setting is a critical level, critical stage where we're actually talking about the reality of what's going to happen. Now, I would never say that during any of those conversations or going through expectation setting level, or the second E in the pyramid is the silver bullet. It's going to give you at least, I would say, a good solid 90 to 95% of what you could expect. But always know, business is not an art, business is not a science, business is a practice. So
Mm.
there's always going to be those unexpected, but those that use the model and actually apply these principles are going to be light years ahead of those that don't.
Like when I hear you talk about it, I still just keep going back to, can entrepreneurs even do this on their own? Like, is this
Yeah.
something that they need to have an expert, a consultant, a coach, somebody like yourself to really look at those things? Because again, you don't know what you don't know. So you think that
Yeah.
your expectations are maybe aligned, but you haven't lived through potentially a startup before. And so you don't know what some of those curveballs are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about that a little bit. Like, what's the advice that you give to people there? I mean, obviously, uh, I would think it would be, I can help you with that. I've done this
Yeah.
before, right? This is what I do. But if somebody did want to try to figure it out on their own, where do they go? Or is it really just you
Yeah.
need to get somebody who has that experience that you can tap into?
It's definitely both. So
Okay.
I'm the first person that will always advocate for self-focus, self-discipline,
Okay.
self-enhancement, self-insight. Um, but saying that, whether it's a coach or whether it's a consultant or whatever the case may be, you nailed it when you said someone that's been through it before. And, it can be a mentor of yours, it could be a good friend, a family friend, a spouse maybe. It could be the coach, it could be the consultant. But the key component here is when you go through it yourself, if you are disciplined enough to be true with yourself and to be harsh on yourself. And when I say harsh, I don't mean derogatory or degrading of self.
Yeah.
Harsh on yourself is to really and truly know what reality is. Expect, I always say to businesses, plan for worst case scenario, which likely won't occur, but at least you plan for that.
Yeah.
Now, why it's more effective with someone else, especially those that have gone through it. Let's put the coach like me or the consultant aside for a second, is because anybody that's gone through something, adversity, or gone through the reality of some exercise, is a sage compared to that person that hasn't gone through it, right?
Yeah.
Now, the second thing I'll say is why a coach, why a consultant? More so the coach, because asking the right questions to challenge someone's mindset is far more powerful and effective than having the right answers for someone that's going through the process or through
Yeah.
the exercise. And
Yeah.
the last thing I'll say about that specifically is when you're building a business, be it a startup, be it a growth opportunity in the business or even getting yourself out of a dark hole in your business, don't build a business by yourself. Don't do it in isolation. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that business owners at any stage of their business make. I can do it myself. I feel embarrassed about asking for help, or it's going to cost me too much money. I'm not even going to try. I would try to dissuade people in doing that. Work with someone, talk with someone. It probably cost you a cup of coffee and will give you a world of information that will be very, very liberating.
On that topic, and you know this, I have a podcast called Amplify Your Business, the Entrepreneurs
Yeah.
Podcast, and I talk to entrepreneurs about, all these different things that they've learned through their journeys, right? And what would they've changed if they could turn back time and go back and redo
Yeah.
some of those things and so on. And one of the things that has come up many, many times over all the interviews that I've done is the idea of surrounding yourself with like an advisory board.
Mm.
And so, the typical kind of people that you would have just naturally in your ecosphere, I suppose, the accountant that you're dealing with, the lawyer that you're dealing with, maybe your bookkeeper, and then maybe a business coach or something to that effect. But then also other people who maybe are experienced, business owners, have walked in those shoes before, whether it's right in the same industry that you're in or not.
Mm.
That was the advice that they gave, and so some of the people were saying you need to have a paid advisory board, and other people were saying you can get away with initially if you don't have the cash flow, is to do an unpaid one, but just know that they're not going to be maybe quite as committed to showing up with when you really need them and so on. You can't borrow their expertise quite as easily. But regardless, I think what you're saying is kind of similar in that respect, right? Where you're saying surround yourself with some people that you can, ask to buy a coffee and pick
Yeah.
their ear a little bit if need be, pick their brain. But um, it, and so there's ways of bootstrapping that. But that the key thing is ask the questions, be vulnerable,
Mm.
right? Don't feel that you have to do it alone.
Yeah, very, very good points. What's critically important, or let me put it this way, I advise business, especially in their earlier stages, is to find an advisory or a team of advisory people. Um, and the first response I get almost all the time is that, well, I'm not ready for an advisory board.
Yeah.
And I say, it doesn't have to be that sophisticated. It doesn't have to be that complex. It's find two, three people. Maybe start with one person that becomes your advisory or advisor, I should say, and use that person in a good way. Use that person as a sounding board. Let that person, and this is so important, make sure that that person is not your yay sayer. Make sure that that person is a naysayer, because
Mm.
when I work with people, when I work with business owners, I'm not there to be the bobblehead, the yay sayer. I'm there to challenge your mindset. I'm there to give you inspiration through growth.
I like that.
And so try your advisory, one person if that's where you start, and let that person challenge you so you can grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Don't surround yourself with an echo chamber of
Yeah.
yay sayers, like you said. I think that is so critical. It's funny, I was having a coffee this morning with a guy who does a lot of work as well with different businesses, more from the trying to get the financial structure worked out, right? So almost like a fractional CFO, and that was one of the conversations that we were had, or the topics that came up in it, is just making sure that you're looking at all sides, right? The flip side of again, like, this is the way it could go, but this is also the way it could go,
Right.
right? And so, like, let's talk about that. Let's have those conversations. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to act on that or plan for that,
Yeah.
but having that awareness, and then you can make an educated decision at that point as to, okay, yeah, maybe I do need to adjust some of my plans.
Yeah. And on top of that as well, I think it's what a lot of people, the feedback I get when going through this process as well is, um, I knew the answer, but you validated it for me.
Yeah.
And The reason why you validated it for me is because you've been there, done that. You got the T-shirt,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is critical for a lot of people that are struggling with the confidence to get there, to do that, take that action,
Yeah.
and get it validated by someone that's done it.
Yeah, and I just add to that too, because I've had this happen as well, where I, I know the answer, or I suspect I know the answer, but I don't want to face into that because I'm really hopeful that that isn't actually the answer, right? And so not
100%.
necessarily that they're validating what I am trying to advance, but they are validating that, yeah, Lance, this is
Yeah,
probably the way that something's going to end up or whatever. And yeah, don't fool yourself, I suppose, sometimes too. I think
100%.
that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is, I would say, sorry, Lance, just to say that,
Yeah.
don't fool yourself. I think if there's any theme at second level, is exactly that.
Interesting. Okay. So, do we move on now to the 30, or do you have some other things you want to talk about around the expectation setting?
No, I think that what I will say before we go to the third level or third E is it's all about at the expectation level. If you are not ready at that second level, there is no shame in saying, I'm going to abandon it for now. I want to go back to the first E and I want to rethink what I'm actually buying into.
Hmm.
The famous Peter Drucker always used to say, talk about abandonment. When he met and he coached Jack Welch from GE back in the early 80s, the only reason why GE became the company it became, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, was because Jack Welch abandoned various components of GE that his people before him weren't prepared to abandon. So once you get to that second level, that second E, if you feel you want to abandon based on your new insights, do it. Go
Yeah.
back to the step one before you go further.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I, you know, our business, we do a lot of video content, and so we brush up against the film industry every once in a while. And
Yeah.
I was chatting with somebody who's in the film industry, and they were saying sometimes you have to kill your babies, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? And they said, well, you get so attached to different scenes, right, or the
Yeah.
story arc, or characters in filmmaking that sometimes you get kind of blinded by it, and you have to kill
Yeah.
those babies off, even though that's the kind of like a legacy thing or something that you really wanted to have. But
Totally.
what's best for, in that case, the film, but in business, what sometimes is in the best interest of the business, you have to step away from some of those things that you originally were really holding dearly
Yeah.
too.
And it's interesting because it's in the best interest of the business, absolutely. I would add to that and say it's the best interest for the captain of the ship,
Okay.
right? You are the author of your business and you are the first and last employee of your business. If
Yeah.
you are compromised, nothing else goes.
Yeah, good calibration. I like that. Okay,
Yeah.
so moving into the 30. So this is energizing yourself. So
Yeah.
you have invested emotionally into what it is that you are wanting to do. You've gone through, you've checked everything against expectations, and you've talked to different people and stuff. You've done the research, and you feel, yeah, this is reasonable. I'm bought in, and this is achievable. Now I have to energize myself.
You betcha. And just before we continue with that, don't get confused with emotional investment and energizing self.
Okay.
Emotional investment is that personal buy-in, right? It's about thinking, um, debriefing with yourself, your own internal voice, setting that expectation, and then energizing. Energizing yourself is something that I probably wouldn't have been energized before on or about. I'm now energized to do. I'm energizing myself to do that. So before we energized ourselves, we created a reality for ourselves, the true reality, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The bad and the ugly was something that I would have never been energized by,
Yep.
but I've now come face to face with it, and it's one of those bring it on, right? Let's do this thing, right? So I'm operating from conviction or adrenaline, right, about something that wasn't that energizing for me, or I didn't even know about it. Now I do. So at this stage in energizing self, what happens is excitement starts to fade, confidence endures. That's the key. Now we've got a sustainable recipe to move forward. It's about staying connected to your why. Why am I doing this in the first place? I have a lot of clients that have said to me on certain occasions, you know, how did I get here? Why on earth did I do this to myself? Right?
Yeah.
And we don't want people to get there. We want to reinforce so they believe, they build that internal energy to keep showing up. That's the key.
Yep.
When you fall off the horse, I want you to get back on, not because you can get back on and continue to ride the horse with confidence. I want you to get back on so you continue to ride the horse knowing that you're going to fall off again. But this time you're going to fall off for a different reason. And every time you get back on, you are stronger for it and you continue to build your business. Building the business, it never becomes easier.
Yep.
You become stronger. And that's what the energizing self is all about.
Oh yeah, I love that statement, Bruce, because I totally agree. I can't tell you, like it's been 13 years that I've been running
Yeah.
Ample Media. I can't tell you uh, if there's, been a year of those 13 years or even 6 months where I haven't been like, well, that was a new one that just happened to me. Like there's always something, right? That is just
Yeah.
like, huh. But like you said, I developed the tools to be able to navigate through them, and it's getting easier from that perspective. Where it's like, yeah, throw anything at me because I'm pretty confident I'm going to be able to get through it.
Absolutely.
At this stage of the game.
Yeah. And yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just about to say the test for that I do quite often is I encourage people to think about what stressed them, or I'll say to you, think about what stressed you last 13 years ago and think about why it doesn't stress you today.
Yeah.
It's not because that same stress or the same challenge doesn't pop up here and there. It's because I've been there. I've done that. I've desensitized myself to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's never been it's no longer an unknown. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like, in full transparency, one of the ones that I bump into at different stages of our growth has been cash flow, right?
Yeah.
Cash flow crunches. And so, I remember the first time when it was just like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make payroll this payroll period. And, having gone through that many times, unfortunately, through the journey, the 13-year journey, it's like, oh no, we'll get through it. I'll figure it out, and you just buckle down and get strategic about some of the places in which you're spending money and doing the things that you need to do. But the first time or two that happened, man, that was
Yeah,
terrifying, absolutely
absolutely.
terrifying.
You betcha, you betcha. And that's that thing, right? When you say terrifying, if we use payroll as an example, so and this is for another discussion another time, but our relationship with cash as business owners is a terrible one. It can be a very, very abusive relationship on both ends. But when you're moving from the first E to the second E, one of the key components in the second E is that I know it's exciting to think about having a team, but having a team requires you to lead. Having a team requires you to pay them. Having a team requires blah, 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 blah. And then asking the question as an example at that level two or stage two is, what happens if I can't pay payroll?
Yep.
Okay, well let's head that off before we even get there. So by the time you reach the third E or the third level in this pyramid, you're dealing with it already. You know what you're going to be dealing with and how you're going to be tackling it. It doesn't mean that you're never going to have payroll challenges or cash flow challenges. It just means that you're far more prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, so in that circumstance, am I hearing it correctly that it's a little bit of scenario playing, right? Some of
Oh yeah,
those worst case scenarios. Let's walk through that and see how we would deal with that. So we have that plan in place, or we know loosely what was going to happen. So it's not as terrifying because we have done that prep work to prepare. It's like emergency preparedness, right?
you betcha. Yeah, and I see it regularly.
Mm,
A client of mine that I've been working with for probably 6 years now. and they grew pretty quickly. We had tremendous success. Got to a point where I moved out of the scene because that's ultimately what the intention is, to make sure that we teach people how to fish and they're doing it themselves. And then about 2 years between that, or 18 months between that, they took the business to the next level. Very exciting stuff, but unfortunately just gunned it. They moved far too quickly. And it got to a point where, I'm going to get through this. I didn't expect that I would have to sacrifice this or sacrifice that. And unfortunately, they got themselves into quite a deep hole. And trying to get them through that expectation setting so they can actually start getting out of their way. And getting out of their way is a big part of being able to energize yourself. But you can't get out of your way if the expectations or the reality is knocking you
Yeah.
without you even being aware of it.
Yeah, yeah, good points. Any other practical steps that us business owners, leaders, can take to cultivate that sustained motivation? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, it does come in waves sometimes, right? Where I feel
Yeah.
like I can conquer the world, and then there's other times where I do feel beat down. And so, any practical steps there that I can do to keep elevating that energy?
Absolutely. A couple, so first and foremost, and probably a lot of our listeners have heard people say this before, but celebrate. And what I mean by that is not to put your pom-poms in the air and do your happy dance and, all that stuff. But when you are trying to achieve something, don't wait for a long period until you are ready to quote unquote celebrate your win. When you go through something, break it up into smaller chunks, right? It's like a project management process. They'll reach and they'll define certain milestones, achieve those, because each milestone after that is dependent on the ones before. So in this case, number one, celebrate over short bursts. And the reason why that's so important is because we are short-term creatures. We think in short-term
Yeah.
bursts. So I want to encourage people to celebrate as they move forward. It doesn't mean you've achieved the final objective. It just means that you're providing yourself with that little bit of energy as you move forward on each part. The second thing I'll say is, when you're moving through the process, the inevitability of failing or hitting a bump is high, right? People don't become stronger because they succeed. People become stronger because they fail. So it's important that you remember that when you do hit a road bump, don't hit it by yourself. When you hit it, you're going to feel bad, you're going to feel demotivated. I want to encourage you to call that person up, right? That's what they're there for. Utilize your support mechanism, whatever that may look like. And the third bit of advice I'll give people is a great author named Dan Sullivan. And Dan Sullivan wrote, one of his books he wrote was The Gap and the Gain. And I teach this a lot, and I'll say it again. Stop worrying and spending all your energy on this gap that's in front of you, the objective that I have to hit. The reason why he calls it a gap is because it's just not clear. It's just so big. It's just this huge mountain that you're anticipating you have to climb. What I want to encourage people to do is to measure yourself backward. See what you've gained that has put you at this point in your journey.
Yeah.
And you would be surprised. I was skeptical the first time I read this, and as I put it into motion, into action, it's an incredible way to deal with that momentum that you need to keep yourself sustained with.
Yeah, yeah. I liken that to, hiking. I love getting into the mountains and doing
Yeah.
some hiking, right? And if you're always just looking up at the top, and which we need to have a focus on where we're
Sure.
going, right?
Yeah.
But you're looking up there, and it just feels like you're not getting closer to it. And you
Yeah.
pause and you turn around and you look down the mountain, you go like, "Holy crap! I
Uh-huh.
really came a long ways here."
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I challenge anybody that's listening to us right now. If you feel that you just haven't made it or you just haven't arrived, I would highly encourage you to look back, because I can tell you what you've achieved so far has been tremendous.
Yeah, yeah. And that ties into another thing, and I know we're not talking about it, but it just for the audience, the imposter syndrome that I think
Yeah.
all of us have as well, right? Because I think the reason or the root of that imposter syndrome is we're always seeing things that we maybe haven't achieved or we don't feel that we're experts in yet, or whatever the case might be, as opposed to looking at, no, you know what? I've got more experience in this area now than like 85%, 95%, whatever the number is of the population. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
consider myself an expert.
yeah,
Damn right I can.
absolutely. And also just to encourage everybody to think about it, I call it, there's in Lean Six Sigma and lean manufacturing, there's a fishbone exercise. And so I'm not going to get into that, but I liken the fishbone as someone that is thinking of starting up a business or adding a new service or product to their business. If you think the first thing you say is, I just don't have the knowledge in that area, but I'm passionate about driving that for people in the market because it's such a great need for it. Um, you don't have to be the subject matter expert.
Hmm.
You are the backbone of that fish, right? And the little rib bones that go on the side are the expertise that you need to secure or surround yourself with to
Yeah.
provide you with that. You can be the coordinator, you can be the driver of that new value. But always remember, and I can hear people thinking or saying right now, well, that costs money. Of course it does, right? But remember, I don't want you to not drive for success because you are not the subject matter expert. You will eventually become one, but don't let that stop you from driving to the level 2 expectation setting and eventually level 3 energizing self.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that is so true, right? We do become blockers
Yeah,
sometimes of
yeah,
our own success. Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so just for the sake of time, I think we should move on to the fourth one. So
Okay.
execution. I mean, the magic
Yeah,
and everything here is have to be executing, I imagine.
yeah, no, absolutely. It's all about, I don't care who we're talking to or who we're referring to. Every single human being wants to seek traction. They want to see progress for whatever the outcome is. Right? If there isn't a result, if I'm not getting something from the investment that I'm trying to put in, it's game over, right? And when it comes to execution, um, you're now ready to move. Or the question is, you can confidently answer the question, am I actually ready to move? And I can say yes. Because if I'm only hyped up, it means that the previous levels or the previous E's haven't been satisfied. So
Hmm.
at this stage, I'm ready to take action. Execution is, it's not about willpower, it's alignment of all these pieces coming together. When you're done the work on the first three, as I said, the first three E's, the fourth becomes an inevitability. And I want to just restate that. If
Okay.
you've done the work on the previous three, this is an inevitability. It is very similar to what I say to business owners. If you're worried about the money, you're never going to succeed, because money is an outcome of action, and action is an outcome of behavior. If level one or the first three E's are satisfied, you're not even thinking of execution at this stage because it's happening already before you can even think of the fourth E.
Yeah.
And it's that timely movement now through the process. And the cool part about this is that the milestones that you set in place based on reality, you're going to start seeing the results. Not
Hmm.
the result as the final outcome or that peak, as you mentioned in hiking, but when you see, let's say you have 5 steps in your process, and you say, okay, I've hit my first milestone and the results are pretty clear. Guess what's motivating you to continue to the next one?
Hmm.
It's the first one that gives you the results that you are capable, whether it's through yourself personally or whether it's through the team that you've surrounded yourself with.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, I like that. So, in terms of the roadblocks then that people bump into on execution, I would imagine as you didn't do as good a job as you needed to in the first three steps, is there other roadblocks that you can speak to?
In terms of execution.
Yeah, that's going to hold people back from really nailing the execution side of things.
Yeah, Lance, I could try and make it sound really sophisticated and more complicated than what it has to be, but there are three roadblocks to execution, and I'm sure you can guess what those three are.
I think it might be the three E's that precede it.
You betcha. Those are exactly what those roadblocks are, not because they are the roadblock, but because you haven't satisfied those three E's. I encourage and I challenge people listening right now, if you are struggling or have struggled to want to get traction on something, I challenge you to honestly go back and reflect. First E, second E, and third E. And I can almost guarantee you, and I encourage people to email me or contact me if they see anything different, but I can almost guarantee you that those three E's will pop out like a sore thumb.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's about the foundations, right?
it
Everything's
is.
about making sure you have a good, solid foundation and the rest kind
Yeah,
of falls into place, right?
you betcha. You betcha.
Now, you're offering an ebook on this as well, I think, right, to the audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can you share a little bit about, I mean, the key takeaways I expect is going to be, a deeper dive into the how do you do the four E's
Yeah.
part of it. Can you speak to me a little bit more about
Yep.
what's in that that's going to help them implement the 4E method?
Absolutely. So the at each level of that pyramid, and you'll see this throughout the ebook, it gives you a lot of context, a lot of content, more than obviously what we're talking about right now. But what's really helpful and very powerful is that it takes you through an exercise at each level. And not only one exercise, there are a couple of exercises that you'll go through, but it gives you the tools to actually start implementing this. And going back to a comment you made early on in this discussion, Lance, is, if people can do this by themselves, the ebook is probably a very, very strong way to do that, because you'll certainly hear Bruce through the ebook and encouraging you and challenging you with some critical questions um, as you move along. So I encourage people to utilize the ebook. The ebook it's not a very long book. It's a good 30 pages, but it's not one of those books that you would have to read to learn as a textbook. It's one of those books that really encourage you, really challenge your thoughts as you move from each level to the next.
Yeah, it's a bit of a practical guide. It sounds like that
Correct.
you're referencing as you're implementing.
Absolutely. It's a field guide in many respects.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. And that's what we're hoping for with this series is to give people that practical know-how or advice on how to, overcome certain things. And so I love the practicality that you've built with that book. How can people access it?
Well, they can simply go to our website where
Okay.
it'll be available. And our website is www.4, the number 4, workplaces.com. And another way to do it as well, and I encourage people, we love to receive emails from people. If you want to email us directly at info@4workplaces.com, we will send you a copy right there. And the cool part is anybody that's part of is listening up right now. We also invite you to a cup of coffee. So once you've read through it and you want to go through it, and it'll, like I said, it won't cost you a dime, to come talk to us about what you've experienced through the ebook and how we can help you take it a step further.
Yeah, that's a really generous offer. And just to be clear, that's a virtual coffee or an in-person coffee. So people anywhere around the country or North America here can definitely tap into your expertise
Yeah,
and ask you a few questions and you're happy to
absolutely.
help out, right? Because that goes back again to the why in your passion, right?
Absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely see that in our interactions and with the the clients that we share. it's just the support that you provide and the things that you do for your clients are just exceptional. So
Thank you.
definitely huge fan of Bruce and the team over there at Workplaces and what you guys are doing. And thank you for sharing this knowledge with us and giving a real practical tool that people can use to really leverage to grow their business and get unstuck, get out of
Yeah,
that stuck trap.
yeah, my pleasure, Lance. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Everybody, if you enjoyed this one, we have lots of upcoming webinars every other week. You can head over to our website, hit the resources tabs at amplemedia.com. The resources tab, you're going to see the series there, so you can go back and watch any of the replays from previous ones. Again, super practical knowledge, just like what you received here from Bruce today. So thank you, Bruce, again. Really appreciate you coming out and sharing all this great information. And everybody who's listening, I want to welcome you to tap into all of the resources that we have to help you grow your business, and really excited to see your growth trajectory continue. Until the next webinar, everybody have a prosperous day.